You're watching City Channel 4, your window to our community.
I was very honored to be invited to present. I certainly wouldn't have assumed that I had any story to tell that was anywhere near as interesting as some of your other speakers. But I always appreciate the opportunity to have an adult conversation that's uninterrupted. I have 4 kids, and most of the time I feel like I'm just barking out orders and trying to figure out the next day's schedule with my husband, so it's nice to just have this forum. And honestly, it was really nice, a gift really, for me to have the opportunity to think back with gratitude at my life to this point, which is not something we often do, and try to introspect and look through some pictures. And so you'll see some old photos in these slides. I'm not that old, but I start to look at the dates and I realize when you guys, many of you were born, and I start to realize that. So anyway, I really appreciate that gift. It's been a real pleasure just preparing for the talk, so hopefully you also get something out of it. So I wanted to start with a story about my son. So this is Charlie. He's 7 years old in this picture. He's 7 years old right now. He's a very sweet boy. He's got a little bit of an inside enthusiast, which we would like to change, get him outside a little bit more. But very sweet boy. And the story I'm going to tell took place actually 2 years ago. So he was 5, the summer before his kindergarten year. And we decided that we'd go out as a family. It was a beautiful Sunday morning. We'd go out to Lake McBride, and we'd get in the boats and do a little kayak trip on Lake McBride. Calm water, early morning, hardly anybody's awake. And I got on the paddleboard and had just gone around the point, and suddenly I hear Charlie yell, "Ah, my vagina!" And of course, that's a bit jarring for anybody to say. It was, broke the silence of this beautiful morning, but also he's a boy. And so it just has struck me over the years that this is kind of indicative of our family, and also to some extent tells you about my path towards where I am right now. So why did Charlie say that? Besides the fact that he had sort of straddled, the reason he said it was because he hurt himself, but he was going from the dock to the boat, and the boat started to move away from the dock, and he sort of straddled and had a little straddle injury. But why did he identify this as his vagina? So part of the reason is because he's got a lot of sisters. So this is my family, my kids, and you can tell a little bit from these pictures that that the girls have their own personalities, and they're strong personalities. And Penelope there on the floor likes to be naked. She likes to cry and scream and make sure that her voice is heard as the youngest child. And despite the fact that Charlie is always asking me for a brother, I think he really does get a lot from being the only boy in this family, and I think he'll be a wonderful partner to a woman potentially in the future. But the reason that he's so familiar with the word vagina is that we say that a lot in our house. And that may be because I'm a gynecologist, probably mostly, but I think it also is a direct response to kind of the trauma I felt in my own childhood and adolescence when it came to anything gynecologic, anything that had to do with how my body was developing, how the girls around me were developing. And so I think a direct response to that is part of the reason that I became who I am and do what I do. And the way that I have tried to be very open with my kids about the anatomically correct body parts that they have and not being shy about talking about them. We have told Charlie that he actually doesn't have a vagina, but. So what do I do? It's always, I find it a little awkward to kind of try to consider how I define myself or kind of what I do. Primarily professionally, I'm a assistant professor right now in obstetrics and gynecology. I primarily do gynecology. I have a pediatric and adolescent gynecology clinic, so I just saw a 7-year-old this morning all the way up to menopause and post-menopause. This is in the top middle there is a picture of me graduating from medical school with my parents. I also, as was mentioned, was one of the co-founders of Girls on the Run in Iowa. So Girls on the Run more broadly in the US was founded in '96 in North Carolina, but we were the first group to bring Girls on the Run to Iowa, and that was in 2006, 2007. And so this is Eve, who's now almost 9. So I was pregnant with her when we were first founding Girls on the Run of what used to be Johnson County and is now Eastern Iowa, as we've grown, and it's become quite a business. It's now its own nonprofit with an executive director, and that's been a really great experience for me and hopefully for the community. So I'm also a faculty counselor and senator. And as part of my medical work, as was mentioned as well, I go to Haiti at least once a year. My husband goes more often. So my husband was co-founder of another nonprofit called Community Health Initiative Haiti. And basically their mission is to partner with communities in Haiti to work together to improve their community health, and whether that's through actual physical health work, to clean water, latrine building, agricultural work, plastic recycling, to bring economic development to the country, et cetera. So there's a lot of different work that they do. When I go down there, I typically do some women's health work. And so up there in the corner, this is Carol, who's pregnant with her third child. And this is her daughter, Dashlyn. And Carol actually lost her second child to cholera. And so I that's a wonderful part of the work that I get to do, being involved in the healthcare there. And then I also, you can see the entire family down there at the bottom. I pretty actively try to support my husband in that work that he does, because he's one of these people who feels like you can do 4 million things in a day, and he's trying to change the world, and kind of requires quite a lot of work to keep the family running. And then I also identify myself as an athlete, so I'm climbing over there back in 2002. And I think that has had a lot to do with how I integrate health and wellness in my own life, and how I've developed into, say, working with Girls on the Run and to helping adolescent girls and their wellness. So I kind of, in thinking about this over the last few weeks, I've identified, as most people probably would identify, what has shaped your passions? And I think I would identify that generally an overarching passion that I have is to bring information and tools to young women, girls, and women to try to help them to find power in their bodies and their gynecologic health and their reproductive health, instead of burdens and restrictions. And so I think, how has that developed? I think it's been a combination of, again, family and personal influences and socio-political changes that have happened since I was born. Basically, and there's 2 interesting things that occurred within the year that I was born. One being Title IX, to encourage equity in, well, it was mostly first for employment, really, but has come to really represent sports, equity in sports, in federally funded sports programs. So that's represented here. And also Roe versus Wade, within a year of my birth, was put into law. The picture on the left is one of these fun ones that I found that I scanned in, which is me, the big smile and the really bad perm, from probably, oh gosh, late 70s probably. My sister acting as the bruiser, which I think, as you'll hear, had a lot to do with my development, who's older than me, and then my little brother. So between these kind of socio-political trends, changes in the world around me, and my own personal experiences, helped shape who I was and who I am. So, it maybe because I live in this world all the time, but puberty, such a powerful and strange thing that we all get to go through. And it has such differential effect on people and on girls versus boys. There's some really interesting data behind that. But these pictures, this is a picture of me when I was 14 on the left, and a picture of my sister when she was 14 on the right. And this probably doesn't capture it super well, but these were the pictures I have. You can probably tell that I was a late bloomer. I was pretty skinny. Late puberty, which I will tell you is a good thing. Now that I see all these girls going through puberty a little bit earlier all the time. But at the time, I was awkward, didn't understand what the other girls were doing. And my sister, early puberty. So by this time, she was a classic rebel. She would not pose for any pictures. This was like the 5th color her hair had been dyed. You know, her sex drive way outran her brain development, just maturity, right? I mean, that's the problem with early puberty, right? Our brains are not ready to deal with these changes that are happening and these drives that we're feeling. So she was this classic pushing everybody's buttons, very smart, but a troublemaker. Wreaked havoc in the house, had adult boyfriends at an early age. I mean, my parents were just beside themselves with my sister. They did not know what to do with her. All I knew was that the house changed. It was hard to be there, that she actually moved out for a while because it was so difficult, that there were times in the month that I did not understand her. This was, you know, a sister that I'd gotten along with for years, and it was just all a very disruptive thing for the whole family. And at the same time, being a late bloomer, I didn't get it at all, and I didn't understand what was going on with my friends going through puberty either. Why did suddenly everybody not want to speak out? All these smart girls that I knew. Why did they suddenly care more about the way they looked and the way other people, especially boys, thought that they looked? It was just all very disturbing to me, and especially within the family. And so a lot of what I think I did in my adolescence and teen years was a reaction to this, especially with my sister. So to try to be the perfectionist kid, and try to do everything right, and to try to fly under the radar so that I didn't have to ask for help. In fact, by the time I got my first period, I didn't even tell my mom, which to this day she says, I can't believe we didn't share that experience, you know. But I just didn't want to be that person. I knew that it had just created a crazy person in my sister, and I didn't want to be that kid. So I wanted to only have good report cards, no problems, do everything right. So some of the data, again, which is just remarkable, and I don't think we all appreciate it, is that girls who go through early puberty are more likely, not surprisingly, to have a teen pregnancy, less likely to go to college and complete college. They're going to typically make less money in their future careers. Whereas boys who go through puberty early, it's the opposite. They're more likely to be given leadership positions. They're more likely to finish college and go to postgraduate training. They're more likely to be in leadership positions in their future and make more money. And then on top of it, there's medical issues. You're more likely to have high risk of breast cancer, ovarian cancer with earlier puberty, and actually be your eventual height shorter as a woman. So it just adds insult to injury when you're dealing with all of these body changes, when your brain is too young to deal with them. And then on top of it, there's all these outcomes, which much of that has to do with how society deals with girls becoming women at an early age. But regardless, I think that these are powerful things that obviously can shape our own experiences, what we do with our lives, and our outcomes in the world. It's quite remarkable. So it was fun to look through my wedding pictures too. So this is kind of one of the outcomes of that. And if you can kind of appreciate, there's a lot of tuxedos there. There aren't a lot of dresses. And that's because I basically at that point said, I don't understand these girls around me. And so I just didn't have a whole lot of girlfriends in my adolescence and teen years and even young adulthood. And so here's my sister. So she did survive and we're now friendly. More so because we live in different countries. But she, you know, she made it through, as most people do. But I basically have, you know, like 2 bridesmaids plus a sister, and then 5 of these groomsmen are my bridesmen, I called them. So I just thought that was a kind of an interesting picture, sort of indicative of how I started to just be really afraid of women. Like I just didn't understand these women, and what I don't feel any kinship with them, and so it's ironic, right, with what I do now. But again, I think that a lot of it is in response to trying to figure this out, trying to cognitively apply my brain to why am I feeling disoriented in this situation, and what happened to my sister. Now, this is where kind of sports comes into play. So thank goodness, my dad was part of this like 80s first running boom where the first 10Ks were out there and people started to sell Nikes and start doing some running. So my dad would take me running with him. And it turned out I had some facility at it. And so luckily when I was feeling quite disoriented and without a peer group, I was able to find success in running. And so in track and field and cross country. And so this is a picture actually. So what I didn't mention earlier was that I have felt that my life design was sort of cosmically designed for me as I made these decisions in life, as opposed to being one of these people who woke up when I was born and said, I want to always be a doctor. That was not really the way. I think it sort of was one of these things that the path became clear over many, many years. But part of the reason for that was that I moved around a lot growing up. So I'm from Canada, Before I graduated from high school, I lived in 9 different homes in 5 different cities and 2 different continents. So not that crazy compared to some people, but it basically, I think, kind of left me to realize that you can't always anticipate what your next step is going to be, and you try to make the most autonomous decisions possible and the best decisions, but you don't always have control over those things. So this picture on the left is when we actually lived in England, and I found this wonderful track group to run with. Great way to cross cultural barriers. And it was this great group of women who, young women, girls really, who shared my love for running. And so thank goodness for that, because when you're lost as an adolescent, that can be bad if you don't find a good peer group. So thank goodness for finding running. And not only finding a peer group and a team belonging, but also feeling something that I was good at and that I could accomplish, and giving me that positive feedback and an idea that the body is a strong and powerful thing. And it's okay if boys aren't looking at me and thinking that that's curvy and great, because my body is strong and I can train it and it will respond in a competitive way. I can do that. I'm encouraged to do that. So this is me running a race probably when I was about 14. I think that same picture from the one before. And so again, I don't think it's coincidence, but I think it's a good coincidence that Title IX was important for my generation and for the generations coming after me. So this is just a quote from Title IX. And I found this interesting chart that just shows, I don't know if you can read it very well, but the most equitable sports for male and female are actually cross country and track and field. So I happened to find myself in this great time in history where not only was it being encouraged for girls to run, but when it came to college, if you were a decent runner, they were also starting to recruit girls to be on teams. There was money in it because they actually had to fulfill their Title IX requirements, right? They had these big football teams and they had to somehow get enough girls on these other teams to kind of meet these requirements. So, you know, I did well enough in high school. My senior year won the Canadian, I did the heptathlon actually, and I won the Canadian Junior Heptathlon, that I was recruited to go to some really good schools to run track and for academics. And so that is what brought me to the United States for the first time. Clearly, that running that I had done not only kind of saved me from perhaps other poor choices, kept me out of a lot of trouble, I think saved me from issues with eating disorders, but I'll get to that later. But also, you know, gave me the opportunity for another move and a wonderful education. So I think there's no question that it's been incredibly vital. So the picture then on the right is a picture of me. So I ended up at Cornell University. I didn't realize till I moved to Iowa that you had to say Cornell College versus Cornell. So I ended up at Cornell University, great school. Hadn't even hardly heard of it growing up in Canada. We didn't do, you know, SATs or anything. People went to good schools in Canada. So it was sort of foreign to me to be given this opportunity to be at an Ivy League school, but an excellent opportunity nonetheless. And so, you know, it was a wonderful experience for many reasons. Again, it was a peer group that was very focused on sport, health, accomplishment, but also not only through sport, but through academics. It gave me leadership opportunities, so I was the captain of the team for a few years. We traveled. And then also, of course, in this great educational system at Cornell, what I was starting to learn was that my interest in science could be applied to practical matters and could start to help me to understand puberty, basically. Could start to help me to understand the real vital importance of women's health in society more broadly. In fact, my major was called maternal health in society. And it really started to impress upon me how I could perhaps succeed in medicine. So again, this was not something that I anticipated even in high school. I was good at math, I was good at science, I didn't know what I wanted to do. But this combination of this nice, broad liberal arts education, as well as my strong science education at Cornell was excellent. And you know, honestly, I think, as I mentioned before, one of the big things that helped me understand that was seeing a fair amount of eating disorder in my peer group in track and field and cross country. So we had, young women that I lived with who were bulimic and anorexic, and I saw breakdown, I saw stress fractures, I saw people having to leave school, and it just, again, helped me to understand that while sport can be a good thing, in combination with, ultra high competition and high expectations and external expectations of what the body is, it can actually be a negative thing too. So that helped spur on my interest in women's health as well. So the picture over here is what? This would be 1992 on the, I guess, your left side of the screen. And then this is 1999. So this is my group of residents here at the University of Iowa. So I ended up going to Washington University School of Medicine in the interim after graduating from Cornell. And what I should really say too is that if it hadn't been for track, WashU is a great school. I probably wouldn't have gotten in, and I certainly wouldn't have gotten the scholarship that I got. So my coaches provided such strong support and wrote me just this wonderful letter of recommendation, a whole real packet of recommendation about some of the academic All-American awards that I'd won, the leadership I'd shown, besides my just academic work, that I'm sure that pulled me out of the crowd as somebody that had a little bit of extra promise perhaps, or hard work, or that got me that scholarship. Otherwise, and that kept me in the United States. Again, Canada has some wonderful medical schools, and not to say, but as far as what has guided me here, there's no question that support and the experience at Cornell and within the track team was what got me to WashU and an excellent medical education, and then got me here for my residency. So this is our whole group of OBGYN residents. And you'll notice that not only are some of the dresses kind of dated and the hair a little bit, but there's a lot of women in there. And I think what strikes me about that picture is that just a few decades before, even in obstetrics and gynecology, there wouldn't have been that many women in that picture. Now I think the pendulum has swung too far, and I would love to have more men in women's health. But it does just really show this rather rapid increase in the number of women who have been able to be successful in academics and in professional careers, and specifically in medicine. So, and I think that, without getting into a political, controversial conversation, I think that it would be wrong for me to not comment on what reproductive freedom has done for my generation of women. And I think, again, that it's an interesting coincidence that Roe versus Wade came down in early 1973, so within the first year of my life. I think we would be wrong to take the reproductive freedoms we have for granted, because and I know this as both personally and as a gynecologist, that the right to be able to decide when, whether, and if we are going to reproduce has an incredible impact on whether we succeed, whether we get out of high school, whether we go to college. Now, we also tell people in my field of infertility as well, make sure you don't, realize that your ovaries do have a time span. So we get a lot of people coming to us at 40, 42, 45 and saying, I don't know, why is it hard for me to get pregnant? So there is some physiologic limits to that, and there's technology we can help with. But nevertheless, I think the tools that we now have has created an incredible amount of economic and social power. And I don't think that we should forget about that. And I think that made a huge difference to my generation compared to my mother's generation. I mean, my mom was the first person in her family to go to college. She had to pay for it herself because her parents thought it was bunk. And then she had to leave her teaching job as soon as she had a child. I mean, so it wasn't that long ago. So I think those are important, really important things for us to remember. And for me, and I am pleased to have these tools to help these young women and women moving ahead professionally. So I think, this is my last slide. I think I was trying to come up with a way to sort of encapsulate what my passion and my goal is kind of that leads me in to get up in the morning and live my life as I do. I have a picture, the picture up here on the top is a picture of my running buddy Izzy from last year's Girls on the Run. And then again, here on the bottom is my family with the girls all kind of looking forward. And Girls on the Run International, their mission is for every girl to know and activate her limitless potential and to boldly pursue her dreams. And I feel like that is just a nice way of encapsulating what gets me up in the morning and my passions as well. And so I will end it there.
Yeah, thanks. You know, one of them is, and some of these you've already answered, but I'm interested if you have, if you had any difficult obstacles to overcome when you started Girls on the Run. Was there any resistance, any issues, any problems you had when you tried to start the organization?
We have this community is very supportive, I would say, of nonprofit work and in a very philanthropic community. Our biggest challenges, I would say, was this was a group of 6 women. You know, one from the College of Education, one who was an undergraduate student here, one who was a librarian, one who was a stay-at-home mom, I'm trying to think, and then me in medicine, one was in media. It was a group of women, none of whom we'd never had any experience in nonprofit work. So I would say that the biggest challenge was just how do you make a nonprofit work? And it sounds very naive for us to have just been like, let's just start this council because we think this is a wonderful program for young girls to try to help to prevent them from falling into the traps of adolescence, all the focus, external focus on body and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's a wonderful program that I'd be happy to talk about for hours, but we just thought we have to bring this to our community because you know, every girl is at risk. I mean, we talk about at-risk girls. It doesn't matter what your socioeconomic status is. Every girl is at risk for being lost, at least temporarily, if not in the longer term, by some of the things that happen around that age group. And so we just knew it was a wonderful program, but we didn't know exactly how to follow, you know, how to bring that to fruition. Girls on the Run International does help a little bit with that, but it has been a real learning process. And you know, my husband and I at the same time developing these 2 nonprofits, it's really helped a lot. There's been a lot of synergy in figuring out, okay, at what point can you afford to hire an executive director? When do you actually apply for nonprofit status? What does that involve? How much money do you have to raise? What does your budget look like? All these things that, you know, you don't learn in medical school kind of thing. And none of the rest of us in the group, we all had great intentions, but you know, didn't have a lot of experience. And we have benefited from a lot, the business school here and a lot of resources in the community, not only just the support monetarily from the community, but also some of the resources with the university and whatnot. So I would say it was just probably lack of experience was our, not passion though, but lack of experience.
This is from Jessica, and it's actually a really good question. What advice would you give to fellow believers in women empowerment who hope to one day start their own nonprofit girls empowerment program? What advice would you give to somebody who cares about the same issues that you do sitting here?
I would say, you know, to make sure any of this work really has to revolve around a very strong mission and vision statement, and I guess, you know, Nonprofit 101 is that, but what you need to do is have, you know, to have something to kind of wrap your story around, and you have to feel strongly enough about it that you can tell that story. That was the other thing that was one of our challenges, was that we all knew that we felt passionate about it, but how do you go out? Nobody wants to go out there and ask for money. Like, that's really, but that is what you have to do, right? I mean, nonprofit doesn't mean that, you know, you can function on pennies. You actually have a really robust program that will serve girls or whoever your group is, that you really need to be out there and getting word out and networking. And so to be able to share your passion and to be able to articulate your passion in sort of a unified vision, I think, is key. And to have a group of people around you that bring different perspectives to the table, so that you make sure you're not missing out on anything, or you've really kind of generated that kind of support and experience from those around you. It's always amazing, the people out there that you didn't know had this experience or this knowledge or these resources, and once you reach out, you can really start to develop quite a robust group of supporters. So.
Ginny, is there a story? I mean, we saw the picture up on the top there of the young girl that you worked with last year. But is there a story that's come out of the Girls on the Run that kind of the heartbeat that kind of gives aside from the large vision, but actually personalize it of something that's affected you or that you carry with you?
Well, I've been really fortunate to be able to play a bunch of different roles in the organization. So besides, the co-founding, and then I was the 5K coordinator, and then have actually acted as the executive director unpaid. Well, we didn't have one, and anyway, so I've played a bunch of roles, but I've been able to a few times go back and act as a running buddy. And I think those are the experiences. And now I actually just stepped down as the president of the board. So I'm still on the executive committee, but now I have some more time, and I'm coaching my daughter, so I was pregnant with Eve when we first started the organization, and had her in a little car seat the first time I coached, and now I'm back to coaching now that she's in 3rd grade, and so that's really cool. But the running buddy, I think, experience, so I would, any of you folks who want to get a little taste of Girls on the Run, I would really encourage you to be a running buddy, because that experience, even in a short time, so you might run with this girl just one time at the 5K, the final 5K, or maybe at the practice 5K, and you're just encouraging them, you're walking with them, you're skipping with them, whatever it takes, but they'll share with you these amazing stories, and that's what I always go back to. There was the girl that I met for the first time at Coralville Central, and she just starts telling me about how, over there, we lived in our car in that parking lot over there for a long time, and and sometimes I have to take the bus because I don't know where my mom is, and then the other girl that I ran with, who we waited around forever after the 5K, nobody showed up. Nobody came to pick her up. She didn't know who to call. We were calling all the numbers we had. So I think it's those interactions and realizing that just under your nose in our community, there are girls that do not have any support. And they're coming out, and they have such potential, and if you just provide them with the right support and mentorship, then they could be awesome, or they could fall through the cracks. And so I think those little stories that you just catch, that they just share with you, their big hearts, are the ones that I carry with me for Girls on the Run.
I've had, as I mentioned when I introduced you, I've had a number of students who have been, running buddies. With the introduction you gave, how would somebody here actually plug into the organization? I mean, there's a website, but there's a cycle of how it goes too, isn't there? So
right. We have 2 seasons a year, and they're basically the fall and spring seasons. Right now we're sort of like week 3 of a 10-week season, but the website's really helpful. So it's girlsontherunoiowa.org, and you can sign up to be a volunteer and sort of click what things you might be interested in, and you should get information. We do a background check on anybody who wants to be a running buddy or a coach or an assistant coach or that sort of thing. So there's 2 seasons, and the most intensive thing to do would be to actually coach or assistant coach, although that's the most gratifying. And the least intensive would be to either just volunteer at one of the runs or one of our fundraisers, or to be a running buddy. And this is not for the most competitive runners out there if you want your best time in your 5K. This is for come on, stop sitting in the weeds, you gotta go. So I know some of the runners who come out, they're like, I was so frustrated, we hardly ran. It's that's the point, is to just get these girls across the finish line, to give them that sense of accomplishment that you can do this, you can trust your body to actually get through 5K. It's really, it's not a racing program. So I would encourage you, even for those people who don't think they're runners, that we match up people based on their ability. So yeah, the website's really the fountain of information. I mean, you can always, my email is ginny-ryan@uiowa.edu. So I know almost everything going on in the organization too, if you just need that resource.
I know from reading the student papers, there's a lot of folks in here that are thinking about being in a position they actually, at least at this stage, that's kind of an objective, a goal, a dream of theirs. I see on the list here from Morgan the question of doubting yourself along the way in medical school, and did you ever have moments where you doubted whether you could? Did anyone doubt you, and believe that you couldn't? And if somebody's kind of wondering if they've got what it takes. I mean, obviously, you think of med school, you think of a highly intelligent, kind of a certain type of a student. What would you say to someone? It's also very competitive to get in.
Right.
So what advice would you give to somebody who's thinking along those lines of a career in medicine?
Yeah. Well, kind of back to the first part of the questions. I mean, I always had people who sort of supported me in whatever I was doing, but it's sort of non-specific. Nobody in my family, I have no physicians in the family. Nobody really knew what that meant. to go through medical school and to get into medical school. So it was a matter of really sort of gathering the resources around me. Maybe that's a good thing. I mean, I honestly think that coming from Canada and going to the US where everybody was talking about their SAT scores, I was like, I don't even know what that is really. And, you know, I don't know what a sorority is. It was like sort of, I was coming into this foreign where I just hadn't felt all that pressure even for, you know, prior to college. And then I feel like the accomplishments I'd had in track honestly really helped me to say, I can do this if I work hard enough. I mean, I failed my first math test in college, and there were a few little bumps along the road when I thought, oh my gosh, what am I doing here? And then just kind of realizing that, okay, if you work hard enough, you can do that. I never had somebody who I could say, oh, I know I want to be a doctor just like this person. So it was just kind of making the best decisions. I would say that now more than ever, so I do interviews for the College of Medicine, that I really appreciate that what we're now looking for in our physicians is a very broad group of ages, experiences, majors, especially at the University of Iowa, but I think at a lot of places. It's not so much now at most places just what your MCAT score was. It has a lot to do with what experiences you bring to the table, what understanding of the human, you know, humanism and the human body and the human experience is. They really try to have a really nice broad student body, and I really appreciate that. You know, obviously you have a lot of applicants and you still have to do some sort of triaging system, so you're not going to get that initial triage unless there's some, you know, there's some quality to your education and you've had some decent grades. But I do appreciate that they're looking outside of that. I feel like, you know, more than like biology majors, almost we need like sociology majors and psychology majors and things that would really understand the human condition more than just the very basics of the science. So I appreciate that we're looking outside of that. So I would follow your passions, and that becomes obvious when if you have succeeded in following your passions, even if it's not a particular road that somebody said you had to do to get into medical school. And if it takes a few years, you know, if it's not right after college, that these days is well appreciated, that you bring that life experience as well. So.
I'm going to ask just a follow-up question. I'm going to turn it out to you guys for a couple to give you guys a chance to jump in. But I just wanted if you could comment, because so often we think very one-dimensional, that if you want to help others, which is usually the reason people go into healthcare, be a physician, that's kind of, again, that's I want to help others, I care about people's health, you know, I want to make a difference, and so I'll be a doctor. And there's a lot of other ways to accomplish that. And I wonder if you could, because, you know, of course, not everyone's going to get into med school, not everybody maybe should or wants that. And what other kind of things with somebody who's got that inclination could they do?
Yeah, I totally agree with that comment. I mean, I think the people who fail or who are not happy in their jobs as physicians are those people who just see this golden ring, that they're always supposed to be a doctor and they got good grades and so they should be one, and so that then they realize this is not really what's making me happy, but at that point it's maybe too late. There's a lot that you have to go through in medical school to have more than just a general passion for helping people. I mean, that needs to be there, but there has to be a lot more. And if it's not, I think having an idea of what that's going to involve is very important, because there's many, many ways to even have more patient care, for example. I mean, what do you really want to get out of this? I remember in college sort of thinking, well, I don't really know what all the options are, and having somebody come in and talk about genetic counseling. And it was just like, oh, this is, I mean, not that it's something I decided to do, but I thought, oh my gosh, there are tons of other things that I could do to really make a difference in people's lives that have a science background and that may not involve all these years and further, you know, all this expensive training. So I think that it is wrong to just sort of say, well, I just want an MD next to my name and I can do it, so I think I should. I mean, I think you really, in order to find joy in your job, you have to really have an understanding of what that involves to get there and a real passion. So, I mean, I have just worked this morning with a PA. I mean, the PA school here is #1 in the country, so it's no small thing to get into the PA school and finish there. But she said to herself, I don't want to take call. I want to have a family. I want to have a 9-to-5 job where I'm helping people, hands-on, some procedures. What does that take for me to get there? And so she's quite happy to not be out there doing tons of lectures and going home at 5 o'clock. And so, nurse midwifery, we have a wonderful group of nurse midwives that we work with. There's a lot of affiliated professions in medicine that can provide a lot of gratification and a lot of hands-on patient care. All of the fields of nursing can be very hands-on versus very administrative. I've come to appreciate that in research, so I do a lot of research too. And in research, the field of qualitative research, the nurses and the anthropologists have really got that wired way more than we do in medicine. And that's a way of really hearing patients' voices. And so sometimes I think in medicine we think too much quantitatively and everybody fits into a box and a diagnosis. And really the nursing profession has done a much better job at looking at the whole person. So there's a lot of good academic work in nursing and a lot of good patient care work. I would just say, start asking questions. What do you do? Start shadowing, spending some time. And if you shadow a doctor, ask about what everybody else is doing in the clinic and who does this for you and who, to just get a better sense of really what's out there and what might really capture your passion.
I want to give you guys a chance to ask some questions. Does anyone have anything for?
So the question was about raising funds for the nonprofit and what do we use to do that. So we try to, broadly capture a lot of different sources of funds. We have, over the years, had actual board members assigned to grant writing. Now it's one of the roles of our executive director, so we're always looking for grant funds that might apply. We go directly looking for corporate sponsorships, especially related to our 5Ks, so we will, have certain levels of 5K sponsorship that'll get X, Y, or Z at the 5K, so for corporate sponsorship, where we do multiple direct asks with just individuals through the year, and then we have some fundraisers. We bring Luna Fest to, you guys should look out for that. It's a really cool film festival through Luna Bar. It's a short film festival of films made by, for, and about women. We bring that to town, and Luna Bar will donate most of the funds. Some of it goes to the Breast Cancer Fund, and most of it goes back to our Girls on the Run. So we try to be broad about it. We did have to originally, even to start our council, raise $5,000, and that was a lot. That was our, one of our big challenges early on, to raise that money, and that was really through direct asks. Because when you don't have a functional nonprofit at that point, how do you actually raise money through corporate, sponsorship or grants when you have nothing to really prove? You can't even, until you've raised that money for Girls on the Run, you can't even call yourself a Girls on the Run council. So that was through direct ask. That was our big push then, and it's still a real focus of our fundraising. But
Connor's a social entrepreneur, which is, I'm sure, where the question's coming from. Are there any kind of general tips that you would give to people who are wanting to be social entrepreneurs or want to use entrepreneurial skills to do social good?
Gosh, I don't know. That was probably a good question for you.
I need to stump you.
Yeah, no. I mean, I guess I would be interested to hear just sort of what I like some definitions of social entrepreneurism and some, I mean, honestly, I guess I understand sort of what that means broadly, but what are some examples of people out there who are doing social entrepreneurism? I don't know, Connor, if you want to answer that, or I can, but it would be using entrepreneurial skills, so actually generating up, but you're targeting a social good with it. It could be actually, there's a thing called Finnegan's Beer in Minnesota, where all the profits are going to food, and yet they run a structure where they run a brewery, but all profits on top of it go to food for the, for hungry people within the area the beer sold, so that type of thing. Right. Where you just barely are covering sort of your expenses, and then everything goes to...
You're running a business, but you're really doing your profits towards...
Right.
Yes?
My question is, how did the girls in the community, the adolescents, find out about Girls on the Run, and how do you get them involved?
Great question. So typically, a lot of it is word of mouth. We try to have tables up at a lot of events that are sort of that age group related. We put tables up at a lot of the ice cream socials for the early in the school year, especially at the sites where we function already, but we try to reach out, and any runs that are in the area, because we typically find that that's a good source for volunteers and donors, if not for the girls. But so we have, we have little flyers in the bags. We have tables at the events. We go to the volunteer fairs. We send out in the Now what's the electronic sort of at the school for all the elementary schools, the electronic like monthly. So we get word out that way. But typically what we find with that is that they just get bombarded with all sorts of opportunities. So typically what works best, I find, is word of mouth. So I'm coaching now at my daughter's school, as I mentioned, and I'll mention to people, did you hear that we're going to do Girls on the Run this fall? Did you consider it? And people are like, oh, I was so overwhelmed with all the different things that my daughter could do. I don't know anything about it. And so it tends to work better to say, well, Eve's doing it. Do you guys want to do it? Or reach out to the Girl Scouts and things like that. So it works better than just kind of getting random posters up. But that's how we have generally reached out.
Yeah.
What changes have you seen in how people live their lives in Haiti, health or otherwise, since you've been going to Haiti?
Well, I started going there, and as did my husband earlier than me. I'm trying to think of when he first went. 2006 or 2007 he first went, and I went a few times before the earthquake as well. So when you typically think about how things are going in Haiti, it's sort of pre-earthquake, post-earthquake, and how have things improved, if they have at all, since the earthquake. We've worked in some different communities there, so we've really been in these particular communities just for the last 5 years. Post earthquake, partly because we used to work in the community where there was the epicenter of the earthquake, and they had such a glut of nonprofits in that area after the earthquake that we sort of actually felt that we weren't needed. Now, of course, everybody has left, and so anyway, I could go on. But so we're now in another community area. How have things changed? Or people have, the government has changed a little bit. There seems to be a little bit better democratic government there now, although now he hasn't left office as he was supposed to when his term was up. So now there are some riots happening, and in fact my husband's supposed to go next month, and they've been considering whether they should call off the trip or not. And that's always difficult because we go to the same places every 3 months to provide people with continuity of care, and so we really feel a real responsibility to do that, and yet our volunteers are also our responsibility anyway. So I would say in general the government seems to be a little bit better than some of the super corrupt governments that have been there in the past. There's been a lot of mismanagement of funding, so there's some increased sort of mistrust of nonprofits down there, I would say. But that doesn't really answer your question about how people are living their lives. I would say in the communities we work, things have been generally improved, but that's somewhat to do with the help that we have provided and have helped encourage. We have better, we've been doing surveys of malnutrition, and malnutrition rates have gone down. There's more latrines and the water's a little bit cleaner, so we've generally seen kind of lower cholera rates in the area. We have a little bit better coverage with birth control. Still unacceptably high rates of infant mortality, but part of what CHI has done is to have this Helping Babies Breathe program, and so we've just looked at those numbers, and fewer infants are dying in that first day of life. And so I think those are all I can really comment, and is I would say accurately on, is the areas in which we work. Some of the money has gone to good. You do see some of the roads are a little bit better. Some of the electricity is a little more consistent in the areas in which we've traveled. But it's an ongoing struggle.
I just want to do a follow-up because I want to know a little bit more about Haiti too. And could you give, because sometimes we lose perspective about how the other parts of the world live. Could you give just a snapshot of, if any of us were to live there, kind of what life is like as comparison to kind of the blessings we have?
Yeah, well, the question is, what would life be like if you lived there as an expat, American expat, or as a Haitian?
As a Haitian.
Because there are, we do interact with some international expats, and as much as they, work in partnership with Haitians in the community, there's a certain amount of livability that is still required to maintain the energy level and safety for your family that still requires some living in sort of some gated type feeling communities and separating yourself from the general Haitian community. So to live as a Haitian for most people means, no latrine or outhouse, pooping outside, and one room cement hut with a dirt floor, having to pay to send your kids to school, which most people can't do, and that's only elementary school. So no hope really for a high school education. 1 in 4 of your kids dying before the age of 1. Intermittent clean water. We sometimes get frustrated down there that when we have community health workers and people that are working full time with the organization, and we sometimes get really frustrated when they don't, we can help this person, why aren't we helping this person? And I think after you've seen enough people kind of die, honestly, there's a little bit of like, we can't get upset about every single person we lose. And that's a real tough thing for people coming down to Haiti to appreciate and to understand. And I'm not saying that we should not try to intervene in those cases, but to see that, I think that's really encapsulates the difference between living as we do here, where we should not expect our children to die in the first few days of life. That's just ridiculous. Somebody needs to be sued. There needs to be a lawsuit, It's a very different world. So, you eat maybe 1 meal a day. It's a.
I want to get Ginny back to the hospital. Do we have one good question left? Somebody?
Sue, you talked a little bit about your husband, and he sounds like a pretty awesome guy. Could you talk about
He's exhausting.
what he does, but also how you guys met?
He's an emergency medicine physician. We actually met here. I'm a little bit older than him. I was a resident and he was a medical student, so he got all sorts of props for dating a resident when he was in medical school. I didn't work with him, let it just be known, because I do have my master's in bioethics, so I always have to make sure that I'm doing the ethically correct thing. So I never worked with him as a medical student, but we did start dating then. And then he actually went and did pediatrics residency in North Carolina, so we had this sort of 3 years apart, but stuck it out. And then he came back here and did emergency medicine residency, so he's double boarded in both of those things. And he started going to Haiti when he was in North Carolina with some of his pediatrics mentors. And so just continued with his passion for Haiti and to help out, and eventually was working with another nonprofit that they felt was perhaps not using all the funds as well as they would have liked, and so started his own nonprofit. So basically he has 2 full-time jobs. He's the president of the board of CHI, and then also full-time faculty at the university in emergency medicine.
Well, I want to let Ginny get back to the hospital. You guys would give her a thank you.
You're watching City Channel 4. On TV, online, on demand, on Facebook, and now on the go on your mobile device.